Okay, so we are live, and I just want to talk about this film. It's considered a little controversial, and for reasons that I don't really think it should be if you look at the time period. Okay, so I watched a review of The Lover, and it's a good film, but I mean, I don't agree with every aspect and everything expressed in the film. I like it in a historical context that it's showing an era and a location that's gone by. They're basically trying to capture what French colonized Saigon, you know, Vietnam looked like. So that is like what they're trying to capture. It's not that they're trying to like live in this current historical construct. In fact, in 2021, I don't think a film like this would be made. But it is based on a semi autobiographical story, which I'm going to share on Wikipedia. So, the one complaint that people have, I guess, about this movie is that, oh, the leading lady, who was based on a real person, was very young at the time. She was like 15 and a half. But you have to remember, this was like the late 1920s. It was a different time period. And in the movie, she does lie about her age. Like she lies to the Chinese man that falls in love with her. But the problem I have with this movie, like the thing that just bothers me the most is not even the age disparity. It's just the amount, like we know that racism exists, but just the amount of racism. And I really don't like her character. Like I really don't by the end because she's just so opportunistic. Like the most civilized and the most like thoughtful person in the entire movie is her lover. Like he's very genteel, he's educated, he's well versed in Eastern and Western cultures, he's articulate, and he's just a very noble person. But I'm not saying everything he does is the best either. But I have a lot of problems with her character because you can be beaten down by society, you can be downtrodden, but she's just very blasé about everything. Like there are so many different scenes where I'm like, when I saw this when I was younger, I was kind of like, ooh, I didn't want to tell people I was watching this movie because I was like, yeah, it was like rated NC-17 or something, and I watched it when I was a teenager. So I didn't really want people to know about that because I was like, oh, they'd be like, why are you watching this movie? But by modern standards, it's, I mean, there are some scenes that are a little explicit, but compared to a lot of modern movies, not overly so. Also, there's really no violent, like, there's absolutely no violence in this movie except for the violence, except for a couple of slapping scenes. But the most, like, I would say actions, words, that's where the violence comes from. Just her cruelty towards him. Like, she really used him. And people always think, well, rich people use poor people and like the downtrodden are being used. But in this situation, she's a very opportunistic young woman. She's very smart. She's very cunning. And yeah, she is basically the one that's pulling the strings. And this is another reason I feel like, okay, the idea of unrequited love is very beautiful and it's expressed in literature and movies, but in real life, it sucks royal lemons and it's just not a path you ever want to go down. And I'm going to kind of discuss that in my review as well. So I want to start playing the movie for you guys. So let me go find it so you can see it. I'm just going to play part of it briefly. So this is like the train scene where, by the way, like a basically a French white person would not be riding on this train, but as you find out in the story, her family, they are outcasts. They are not part of colonial society because they have fallen.
So it's the crossing of one of the branches of the Mekong on the ferry that's between Binong and Sadek in the great plains of mud and rice of southern Indochina, the plain of the birds.
Excuse me, mademoiselle. Do you smoke?
See his hands trembling.
No, thank you.
I'm sorry. It's so surprising. A young white girl on a native bus. I like your hat. It's original. A man's hat of a young girl. And you're pretty. You can do anything you like.
Your hat?
I live in Billon,
Where in Billon?
on the river, just outside. Big house with the terraces.
A blue stone?
Yes,
It's a Chinese house.
I am Chinese.
Chinese.
He's from that financial man.
Okay, so that's just a little bit of a sample of like, okay, I'll take myself into a bigger screen again, of the film The Lover. So basically, the way that it's set up, okay, we know that throughout the history of the world there has been racism. But here's the thing about this film that's just so mind blowing. She is a young woman, and this is based on a semi autobiographical story, so people can be offended by their age difference. But here's the thing about, I need to actually pull up the Wikipedia article about it. Like, she looks down upon him. Like, the minute she finds out, I mean, she's an overly confident young person, okay? She's very confident. She doesn't, like, she's not a wallflower, okay? She's very confident in herself. And if you look at him, he's kind of, even though he's the wealthy one, he's kind of unsure about himself. And when he tells her that he's Chinese, she goes, oh, Chinese. Like, even though he's wealthy and he's affluent, it's like he's beneath her because she's white. And I get that that was part of the colonial mindset, but it's just so mind blowing because from the very beginning, he is so kind. Like, I mean, I get it. Yes, people aren't comfortable with the fact that they have a carnal relationship, but he's only ever considerate to her. He buys her food, he buys her money. In fact, when they're like in the marketplace, he asks her if she wants something to eat, and she's like, sure, and she just goes for it. And later on, there's a scene where he has driven her home again for the holidays, and her older brother, Pierre, who is a jerk, by the way, is calling her a slut and a whore for sleeping with a Chinaman. That's what they call him, which, by the way, I really hate that term. But there's a lot of, I mean, there's just overtures in this film that are kind of like, yeah, problematic. It's history, of course, but just the fact that they have fallen down in society to where they're impoverished because of certain financial decisions that the mother made, and the mother is a little bit, I guess she's a little mentally unstable. So, like, they aren't even accepted in white society. That's why she's riding the bus, like the little ferry, like they call the native ferry, because she's not accepted in colonial society. Like, her family at one time was a family of means. However, after the father passed away, there was some poor business decisions made on her mom's part. She seems to have been cheated with the piece of land that they bought, which was in a flood area. So they lost all their money. And yes, you do. I mean, you can feel sorry for the mother to a degree, but just her children aren't super likable people. The young son, Paul, I don't have any problems with him. I mean, obviously he's autistic, and his way of dealing with bullying is just to go and play the piano. There is a scene in the movie where he's outside and he's like shooting his gun, and he aims it at Pierre when he turns his back, but he never shoots Pierre. Like, there's no intention of doing that. It's just his thought. he's not going to ever stand up for himself. He's a very timid person, and he's also autistic, so he can't really deal with the confrontation. So there is a vacuum, and Jane's character, I mean, basically she's the one that's going to fill the void there, and she will confront Pierre. And Pierre's a jerk, don't get me wrong, but is her character much better? It's really hard to feel sorry for her character because she tells the Chinese man in the very early stages that their family is shameless, that they are shameless and they will do whatever it takes to get ahead. And even though you can tell early on that he's attracted to her, and I think he's almost falling in love with her when he first offers her a ride, because he starts telling her a story about how his father was so besought with his mom, who has passed away, that he hasn't left his bed in 10 years and he's become an opium addict. And you can tell right away he's falling in love with her, like he's falling for her. And even though he has power and means, like he's kind of nervous. He's not like suave, he's not overly confident. It is our young heroine in the story who is overly confident, but she's also opportunistic, and she isn't very considerate. Like she's kind of not a nice person. Like there's many scenes in this movie that just makes you think, oh my gosh, well, it's based on her real character. Because I've heard, like, even though this is semi-autobiographical, apparently everybody in their family is very self-serving. I get it, people are self-serving to some degree, but they're to a point that they just they only think about themselves. So it kind of, I haven't read the book and I haven't looked into their background, but they keep saying that the mother was like cheated and that she did all the wrong, like she made bad business decisions. But it kind of makes you think after a while, like, I'm not saying what the colonial people did to them was right, but they just seem like they're very uncouth, they're very abrasive, like they don't even have table manners. Okay, there's a scene where her Chinese lover takes them all out to dinner and they're just scarfing down their food, and they might be hungry, but really, I mean, they are just so uncouth. But yet this whole time you have the young girl, she's just sitting there acting like, oh, this Chinese man is beneath me because I'm white. And it's just this racism. And there are people throughout the history of the world that they had inner, because I know people like to think that nobody intermingles, but people have through from the beginning of time. But most people, like a lot of people, don't think like that, the interstitch relationships. Like I know some people have been exploitative, but she's very exploitative. Like it's just kind of cringeworthy, like to the point that she is. Like she's not even subtle about it. She's just like, oh yeah, I'm using you for like money. Yeah, I'm using you for money. And the movie does explore some interesting ideas that I think, well, I think this is why the film gets condemned, but maybe I should share the Wikipedia article about it because it kind of gives us some insights, and maybe I can read it to you and we can discuss and see what you think about it. It is an interesting movie. If you don't like spoilers, this might not be for you after this point because, okay, I think if you read the description, you're going to see right away that this is a tragic love story because one person is very besotted with another person who really doesn't like them very much, if at all. And maybe all they really like about them is, oh, they're attractive and they have money and they offer me a ride and they offer me all these things that I don't have. Like, it's a very interesting, but I mean, it just goes to show you things don't really change. And I'm also going to kind of talk about why I think unrequited love is crap. And I don't think anybody should waste their time on it. I'm going to be 100% honest with you because such scenarios are just so toxic for yourself. No matter, and this is based on a true story, I'm going to tell you why it's toxic. And we're just going to explore that and talk about why you should never have unrequited love for anybody. It's like a toxic dump for your mind. So anyway, let me go to the Wikipedia article about it. Make sure I have it. And I'm going to kind of pull me up a bit. OBS. I think I'm going to add a new window. And I don't want me to be super big, so I'm going to kind of minimize me. So I'm up here, very tiny. I'm going to make me smaller. And then we can look at this article about the movie. 1992, The Lover. The Lover, Lamont, is a 1992 romantic drama produced by Claude Berry and directed by Jean-Jacques Annaud. Based on a semi-autobiographical story by Marguerite Duras, the film details the illicit affair between a teenage girl and a wealthy Chinese man in 1929 French Indochina. The screenplay, written by Anand and Gerard Brock, had a 15-year-old protagonist portrayed by actress Jane March. And yes, this is the controversial part, who turned 18 shortly before filming. A lot of people are very upset, but keep in mind, this film was created like almost over 30 years ago. And it is based on a true story in a time period where one thing you have to remember about the person in real life, she basically was just left to her own devices because her mom would send her to Saigon to go to a French school and to live in a French boarding house. Like, her mom wasn't the motherly type who was like looking over her every day. Her mom could barely hold it together because she had lost her mind, because once she lost all her money in bad business deals, like, she could barely function. She was a teacher in the countryside, but her level of functioning wasn't the best. Production began in 1989, with the filming commencing in 1991. The film made its theatrical debut on the 22nd of January 1992 in France, with an English language release in the United Kingdom in June and in the United States on the 30th of October the same year. The film was nominated for the 1992 Academy Award for Best Cinematography, which is really beautiful if you do watch it. Just the sound effects and the beautiful countryside, like, you really feel like you're immersed in the countryside of 1929 rural Saigon. Like, not Saigon, but I would say Vietnam. Saigon's a city. Apologize there. Golden Award for the best sounding editing foreign feature, and at the 1993 César Awards in France, the film was nominated for 7 awards and won an award for best original music. It does have a nice story soundtrack to it. It's not overpowering. It's just very subtle. I really love the narration of the film as well. The film was a box office success and received mostly positive reviews from general audience, along with mostly negative reviews from American critics, which, by the way, this is why I'm not, like, I know Americans think that their film industry is all that in a bag of chips, but oh gosh, I'm not the biggest fan of like a lot of American movies. Like, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of actors abroad that just do a better job than American actors. I know American actors think they have it locked down, but some of the best acting I've seen recently was from Turkish actors on the series Magnificent Century. I'm just like, sometimes foreign actors put American actors to shame. I'm sorry, but like, there's just like expression, like it makes you feel like you're actually, not that you believe that you're there, but sometimes there's just acting that's better than what you see in Hollywood. That's just my opinion, you know? Overall, the film's performance and cinematography was generally praised. Like, it's very beautiful cinematically, even though, yes, people are very upset about like some of the more problematic parts of the storyline. Although, let's keep in mind, based on a true story, it takes place in a different time period. I don't really like the racism expressed, but I feel like that's because the character, like, she's an opportunistic woman. Like, she She may be young, but she knows what she's doing, and she knows when she sees somebody with money, and oh, he's handsome, and he offers her a ride, and he offers her money, and he takes her to dinner. She's very interested in that. And there's other aspects of the movie that I think more puritanical people don't like. And I get it. This is not a movie for puritanical people, okay? If you want something very G rated, you shouldn't watch this. Like, I know I got like criticized like years ago, like because one friend I told them I liked the movie Wedding Crashers, and I got criticized because they're like, "Oh my gosh, there's nudity in that movie," and I'm done with people that get mad at me for watching a movie that doesn't fit their moral construct, and I'm like, if I can't watch a movie without being criticized, like I can't really talk to some people about certain movies, so yeah, this movie if you're very like strict about what you watch, I wouldn't even watch this film. But if you're open-minded enough to watch it and you're not going to get offended by the nudity and like some of the sex scenes, which by the way compared to 2021 standards are very subdued. Yes, they're a little steamy, but it's nothing like in your face. It's very subdued compared to like many modern type movies. um, the primary characters are known as the young girl and the Chinese man. The events take place in Vietnam, the daughter of a bitter, fearful, and poverty stricken French family living in a rural area. The girl's pretty waif who wears an old linen dress and the fedora. The fedora is very interesting and she like paints her lips. So anyway, I guess I'll take us out of screen share now and I'll remove that. And I'll just talk about some of my thoughts about the film, like beyond that. So let me just remove this. Okay. So I'm going to remove window capture. I'm going to make this big again. Okay, so some of my thoughts about the character. I kept calling her Jane because the actress that portrays her is Jane March, but they just call her the girl. And I guess her name in real life is Marguerite Duras. Look, I watched this film many years ago. I think I had seen it a second time, like back in 2007. But I kind of just was watching it again today because I don't know. I was just kind of thinking about it. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that movie. And I was kind of like, I like to sometimes rewatch something because there were a lot of things that I didn't understand about the film when I was younger that I kind of get now that I'm older. And the one thing that just is so disappointing, that's just so heartbreaking that I want to talk about is this whole unrequited love thing. I know it's a big theme in books and movies. And look, I really do like it can be romantic to a point. There comes an end point where I feel like in real life, like unrequited love is just not healthy for anyone, especially the person that you have unrequited love for. And if you have unrequited love for a person, I feel like that's usually a person that doesn't deserve your love and affection. Like, look, in the film, the one thing that bothered me the whole time was her Chinese lover was just like he was loyal to her till the end. Like he kept saying he wanted to take her away. He knew that in his culture that he couldn't marry her, okay? He was very much aware of that. Like he has awareness. He's not like, "Oh yeah, like my traditional father is going to accept her." Although he even goes against tradition and he tries to tell his father, "Hey, I love her and I want to be with her." And what about how you loved your mom? But he's like, "No, like the father's like tradition." Even though the father is an opium addict, like just pining away over the love of his mother, but no, he has to marry, you know, he has to form an alliance with the rich young Chinese woman he's never met. And he's just so in love with this young French girl. Like, he loves her. He would do anything for her. Like, her family abuses him. They go out to dinner one night and it's so abusive. Like he lets them order whatever they want. They're just eating like pigs. She ignores him in front of her mom, and they're just so rude to him. Like here he is, the one with the money, okay? And the mom's nearly falling asleep, but you know what wakes her up? Oh, he has money. And then it makes me just really not like her mother. Like the whole time, like when I see how she perks up with money, I get that some people like may have been there. Maybe supposedly she was cheated by some men that sold her bad land, but it starts to make you think, well, was she always like thoughtful? Like, did she make good decisions for her family? And then it makes you also think, why did she stay on in Vietnam if her family was struggling? Because eventually they go back to France. Like, why did she continue on when she knew her son Pierre was becoming an opium addict and would steal money from the servants? Like, why was she okay with all that? Why was she okay with like loving Pierre without a doubt? That's another storyline with unrequited love. Like, he may be her son, but she had like this was the child that she loved the most, and she didn't really love her autistic son Paul, who Pierre just picked on and treated like a bully, wouldn't let him have like enough to eat at dinner, and she didn't really love her daughter. Like her daughter, she just let her daughter run around the countryside. And all of a sudden it became okay when she found out, oh, like the daughter has a lover who can pay for her, like to do this, that, and the other, and pay for them to go places. It's kind of disgusting. I mean, at the end, maybe the mom redeems herself a little bit, but it just shows how manipulative and cunning they are because they go, oh, he was so discreet, the Chinese man. Like, he paid for our passage back to France and he paid off your brother Pierre's debts. It's just so like selfish. And then that night when they go out to dinner, okay, ooh, disgusting. And here's Pierre like telling our young heroine that she's a slut for sleeping with the Chinese man. But when they go out dancing later, he grabs like a Vietnamese woman who is wearing like the modern 1920s garb dancing, but he starts like making out with her, and it's just disgusting. Like, he takes whatever he wants, so it's okay for him because he's a man, but because she's a woman, like, oh my god, she's a slut. Like, it is a double standard. But the thing that's really interesting about this movie is the character. She doesn't feel inhibited at all by her sexuality. If anything, like, she never has a moment of like disconcertedness. Like, even the time when she first has sex with the Chinese man, it's very just matter of fact. Like, she's interested, and she even tells her friend in the boarding house, like, oh, like, she likes the idea of having sex with anonymous men. Like, she doesn't feel any shame. Like, she's not. It's just a very interesting angle because you can kind of tell she's just very. I mean, I'm not saying I agree with her attitude. Like, that's not really my attitude. But it's a very interesting dynamic, like the way she looks at sex. It's almost like, okay, when you look at this movie and you know how Marguerite Duras was in real life, she was kind of the aggressor in the relationship. Like, she felt very confident in herself. Like, she never felt guilty for wanting to have sexual pleasure or wanting to have a sexual relationship. She didn't feel guilty about any of that, okay? Guilt never enters her mind. Like, it just doesn't. Okay, she doesn't feel guilt. It's a very interesting dynamic because usually it's the woman that like would be the one that would feel guilty about these things or feel like, oh, she should be much more subdued. But it's actually him. It's the Chinese man, and he is so restrained. Like, he's very civilized. In fact, like at the scene when he takes her family out to dinner, and then they go dancing afterwards. The brother Pierre tries to start a fight with him, and he says, "Oh, it would take two of you to fight me." And he's just very restrained. He's like, "No, it would take four of me. You don't know how weak I am." But the fact that he loves her so much that he would put up with all that. I mean, there is a scene later on that's just very like and I think this is where people get kind of put off. It's just that he's been basically violated during that dinner and during the dancing, and she acted like she doesn't even like him and acts like, oh, because I'm white and he's privileged to be with a white woman who's so uncouth that he'll do anything for me. There is a scene that's very problematic. Like, he kind of just has, I'm not saying it's forced sex because she sits there and she doesn't fight him off, but yeah, he just has sex with her like right when they come back, and it's not passionate and it's not showing love and compassion. But he is heartbroken because he loves her and he wants to be with her, and he will tell her that, and she'll always be like, oh, it's good that your father doesn't want us to be together because I don't like Chinese. It's just always like this antipathy. Like, she has so much antipathy towards him. Like, she really, it's almost like she doesn't like him, and I don't really like her. like after a bit, I'm just like, what is redeemable about her character? Like, I just really start to think, like, she only thinks about herself. Like, supposedly she thinks about her brother because she doesn't want Pierre to be mean to her younger brother, Paul. But at the end of the day, she's always thinking about herself. And even when it comes to her academics, like, she is very academically inclined, but she doesn't seem to appreciate it that much. She's just like, oh, I study and I do well and I want to write stories. And it's just kind of like, ugh. It's not like she wants to do something for humanity or the greater good. She wants to become a writer so she can write a story about her mother and the wrongs that they've experienced. But she doesn't care about like any wrongs that she inflicts upon other people. So she might not be a villain like Pierre, but she is very centered in her own way. And I do get it. People are like that. People have good and bad. People have altruism. People have self centeredness. But it's just her character is just so like, woo, laser focused on what's good for me. What should I do? What do I get out of this? It's just like, there's no subtlety about it. It's just like, I think this is how the woman was in real life. Marguerite Duras, I think she just was kind of like, yeah, it's all about me. Hey, like, I want what's good for me. And if this situation is good for me, hey, I should enjoy it. And supposedly at the end, like, she realizes that she loved the Chinese man, but I feel like I don't believe her. I just feel like I don't believe her. I feel like she just was like, oh, okay, this was a good situation for me. Like, he would do anything for me. He would do all that for me. And even at the end, like, he pays for her family to go back to France, and he pays off her brother's debt. And he does all these things for her. And he even tells her that he still loves her. Like, years later, he calls her and he says he still loves her. And I'm like, I don't really understand. Like, why does a woman like that or a person like that deserve love? But it kind of shows you this thing with the whole unrequited love is that people who don't really deserve love seem to get it. Like, we give it to them. And I do understand, there are reasons that we might be attracted to someone or love someone or have feelings for them, but I feel like there needs to come a time in life, like, because this is based on a true story. And apparently, I mean, I don't know, maybe he didn't love her to the extent, maybe she dramatized that for the book. It's fiction. She might have like over exaggerated, but we do know that in real life and in fiction that there are people that just unrequited love is given to them. And yes, I know people always say, well, one person wants a relationship more than another or wants this more than another. But I feel like the person who feels like that's okay shouldn't be given that. And I do understand that we can't change the dynamics of that and we can't, but I don't feel like anybody that's ever been in that position where they feel like it's okay to take something from another person or to just accept that it's always going to be that way is correct. I feel like unrequited love is stupid. I really do. Like, I get that you can love someone and you can maybe love someone more than they love you, but the whole unrequited love thing is garbage. Because after a certain point, characters that I respect will eventually realize unrequited love is just, it's a waste of your time because that person's always going to be self-serving. And why do we love people who are that self-serving and only thinking about themselves? Like, they don't deserve your affection and attention. If you're not getting anything from somebody, there needs to come an end point where you say that person doesn't deserve anything from you. So I know we have like these storylines where like it's tragic love and unrequited love, but I kind of hate unrequited love after a certain point. Like, once I feel like the person who is in the situation where they realize that they're loving this person who will never love them back, that they should stop, that they should end it, that they should put it out of their mind. And yes, it's easier said than done, but you definitely should put this stuff out of your mind because people who engage in that dynamic, they're, at the end of the day, it's kind of almost narcissistic because they're willing to just use people as pawns. And I'm not wanting to say that this character was a narcissist, but in a way, I mean, I think she knew like she wasn't all that in a bag of chips, but she kind of was pretty confident with herself. Like, she wasn't too worried. I think the only time she paused was like, oh, the people at school don't talk to me because they think I'm a slut. Like, she kind of paused for a minute, but it didn't make her change what she was doing. And I'm not saying that women should be slut shamed. That's not what I'm saying. Like, the double standards are ridiculous. But she doesn't really care about anybody but herself. And I think there just comes a point that we need to say, why do the people that just don't care about anyone and just take, and don't have any compassion for another person deserve unrequited love? Why do we give it to them? Like, I understand there's like attraction, there's physicality, but you have to have an endpoint where you know that someone like that is not somebody that you give anything to. And I think, like, eventually I wonder, like, I don't think those people are ever going to question it. It's almost like they feel like they're entitled to that. Like, people feel like, and I feel like they take something from it, by the way. Like, they like it. They like the thought that somebody will always be in their corner or pining away for them. And they, like, kind of get a high off of it. But I think after a certain point, you need to stop giving them that. And I feel like this movie is a great example because, yes, there is a lot of racism in there. And it doesn't just have to do with the time period. It just has to do with the fact that there have always been inter-ethnicity relationships, and not everybody was that exploitative. But just the fact that she was okay, like, treating him like that, like, treating him like a pawn in her little game. Oh, it just makes me kind of mad. And everybody's so worried about the age difference. They're like, oh, but he's older and she's younger. But if you actually watch the movie and you do some research about the character and you think about the time period, well, she was pretty opportunistic, okay? She was an opportunistic young woman, and she knew that she was going to get something out of that situation. So I want to watch that movie and comment on it from a 2021 perspective. I think you need to realize this was in the late 1920s in French Indochina. Her mother was a little mentally unstable, just let her run wild. Like, she basically was at a boarding house in Saigon. Like she says in one scene, you leave me alone all year. You don't care how lonely I am. So her mother wasn't mothering her at that point. Like, after a certain point, she's just like, grow up, child, go to boarding school. Like, oh no, you're not showing up, like, going back to the boarding house at night. That's okay. Like, we'll just pay off the headmistress. And it's a very problematic, like, I do like the movie, but this isn't a movie that you could watch over and over again. Like, I watch it every once in a while, like, when I'm curious about it. Like, this is the third time I've watched it, like, in 20 years. Like, it's not like I love it. It's a good movie if you haven't seen it. I might have spoiled it for you if you haven't seen it. But yeah, there's just a lot of problematic, and the thing that just really bothers me about it, but I think that we can kind of learn from this movie, is why unrequited love is stupid. It really is. At the end of the day, I don't think people who are selfish, that don't give anything back, deserve your unrequited love. I feel like at a certain point you need to realize often these people will exploit that situation. They know that somebody holds a candle for them. They know that somebody's going to do things for them, just like this young girl, or they get a high off of it. And I think you need to realize that that's not worth your time of day, and nobody deserves that kind of adoration and affection. And I don't think those kind of people ever question it. I think that it's a slightly narcissistic propensity, actually, that somebody just accepts unrequited love. I feel like with a healthy person, they would acknowledge that that's wrong, and they wouldn't, like, want to feed that flame of wanting the person who has the besotted, like, pine away for them. They wouldn't feed that flame, but they feed that flame because they get some narcissistic supply out of it. It's kind of interesting when you think about it. And I'm just like watching this movie and getting all these different thoughts about it. But yeah, that's just my reaction to The Lover, watching it again in 2021. I really don't like her character. Like, I know she's based on a real person, Marguerite Duras, and she may have been very cunning and very good at survival, but I just don't like her as a person. Like, at the end of the movie, like, I just keep thinking about every interaction, like, and then even her friend in the boarding house, like, her young, because there's one other white girl, and I don't know what the nature of the affection was. But the young girl's like, do you still love me? Like maybe that friend kind of loves her. I'm not sure exactly what kind of a relationship. Maybe they're just friends. But the character, she's just kind of cold and she doesn't respond. Like I don't think she loves anybody. Even at the end of the movie when she thinks, oh, like she's listening to the song by Chopin on the Alexandre Dumas ship and she's going back to France. I don't think she ever loved this Chinese man. I think she just feels sad that she realizes, oh, it was kind of beautiful and he was willing to do anything for me. And oh, that's over. I think that's all it is. I don't think she really loved him because if you love somebody, you're never going to exploit them to that degree. I'm not saying things are perfect, but you don't exploit people you love. You just don't. And unrequited love, it's just not worth your time of day. Like, I think at a certain point, when you realize that there's nothing to be gained from like a relationship with somebody and that they're willing to exploit like your adoration for them, I think you need to cut your losses and just realize that you shouldn't give that love and affection to such a person because that person doesn't have any qualities that's like good for you. They don't care about you or your welfare, but they're willing to exploit any caring that you have for them to make themselves feel better or to get ahead. I think in this case it wasn't for her to feel better. She felt pretty good about herself. It was just because she's like, oh, this is a way to get ahead in life, and why not? And he has a nice car, and he's kind of handsome, and he can take me to nice places I could never go to. So, yeah, that was my reaction to the movie. I'm sure a lot of people have a different reaction, but that was mine, okay? So, anyway, thanks for watching.